Hi, everyone. Welcome to Microeconomics Chapter 8, Segment 2. In this segment, we're going to focus on exclusively the perfect competition industry structure. We're going to look at industry and firm, explaining the difference. Should be pretty intuitive. And then we're going to introduce the types of revenues that we're going to look at. So let me take us over to the slides, and we'll start with the slide in Chapter 8 called Perfect Competition. So perfect competition, we have to define a little bit more specifically. In the previous segment, we explained the four market structures. Here we're focusing on perfect competition. There shouldn't be any surprises in the initial description. It's a market where all buyers and sellers are basically price takers. So if a market exists, the industry will set a price in the market, and when that price is set, the sellers basically can't do anything about it, and the buyers can't do anything about it. They are both price takers and price takers, buyers and sellers. So we already said there's many small buyers and sellers in this market. The condition that no preferences are shown just simply means that if a bunch of students set up a business, they're not going to exclude selling to instructors. And if an instructor goes out to the market, they don't care who they buy from, there's no preferences. And it might not mean too much at this particular point. If we were doing this mathematically, we'd need that assumption in there. But for now, we just assume there's no preferences, so there's no reason to advertise anything because you're just going to buy from anybody. The ease of entry and exit we talked about by buyers and sellers. So sellers can easily set up shop in a perfectly competitive market. That's the assumption, and they can easily close it down. And this last one, the same market information is available to all. What that means is if I'm in perfect competition and there's a new technology that comes along, or I want to put on a sale price, I would never do that because everyone is completely aware of all the information in the marketplace. So in what ways is the stock market a good example of perfect competition? And in what ways is it a bad example? So let's click through this and see. So we'll look at some of the characteristics that it makes it a good example. So there are many millions of buyers and sellers. So that idea that there's many, many buyers, many, many sellers means that this is a good example of perfect competition. The products sold are homogeneous. That means they're undifferentiated. Okay, so that's a bit of a stretch, but we're just saying all stocks are just stocks. All shares in a company are just shares in the company. Yeah, the companies are different, but we're talking about the shares. And then there's a tremendous amount of information available about the products. So all those are really good examples of perfectly competitive industry. But the stock market is also a bad example because some buyers and sellers are big enough to affect prices. They can heavily trade on a small volume stock and actually move the market. So they're supposed to be price takers, but in some cases they can push the market around. There's not equal access to information. I think people might know what insider trading is. It's where you unfairly get information about what a company is going to do ahead of when it actually does it, and you trade on that information. I think the most famous insider trader was Martha Stewart. Maybe look her up and see she traded on some information that her broker obtained, and she ended up going to jail for it. And it's not typically free entry into the market. You still have to pay fees to get in and out of this market. So the reason they put this example in here is so you kind of see that there's no perfect example of perfect competition, but we will categorize all industries one way or the other pretty clearly by their characteristics that we will go through. So in perfect competition, there's always an industry and there's always a firm. So here's the industry over on this side, and this is the firm. So in the industry, we have normal supply and demand like we always did before. There's my demand curve. There's the supply curve. And they intersect and they give a price. In this case, we're going to make it $20. So that price gets transmitted over to the firm. So remember, consumers have to pay 20 bucks for that product no matter what. And we're assuming that the firms are so small that they see that price of 20 and they really have no control over it. They basically take the price of 20 and decide whether they're going to sell or how much they're going to produce. And really, that's the decision that the firm has to make, is how much am I going to produce given that the going price is 20. Now, I know the going price is 20, and we assume the firm is so small that they can sell everything they want at 20, which essentially means that demand is horizontal and the firm is a price taker. So that's the picture of the industry that we'll always see, and picture of the firm. We have to do both. We want to introduce revenues for perfect competition. And in fact, these revenues are for all markets. So the first definition of revenue, total revenue, it's just the quantity you're selling times the price that you sell it at. That should make sense. The total revenue that you receive is, well, the quantity of how many you sell times the price of what you sell it at. Right? If I go into a store and apples are $1 each and I buy 7 apples, well, the store sold 7 apples at $1, $7. That's total revenue, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. The second condition or definition of revenue is average revenue. And it should make sense that the average price I paid for those apples was $1. But let's do the math. Average revenue is just simply the total revenue divided by the quantity. And total revenue is price times quantity. So these cancel out and we end up with total revenue just being the price. Or sorry, average revenue just being the price. So that will always be the case if a firm is only charging one price for the product. Average revenue will always be the price. An interesting and very important concept that we have to focus on now is the concept of marginal revenue. And it's the extra revenue received from one more unit sold. You have to keep that in mind. Now we're talking about not all units sold, but just the one more unit sold. Marginal revenue, this triangle means change. So change in total revenue over change in quantity. Often the change in quantity is 1, but it doesn't have to be. And so marginal revenue is the change in quantity times the price you get from that quantity, and these cancel. So in this industry structure only, marginal revenue is equal to price as well. So we have to keep that in mind. Average revenue equals marginal revenue equals price. Let's take a look at a chart of these things. Let's just, it shouldn't be too surprising of what we're looking at here. Here we've got output and we're saying output increases. Well, here is the price. Well, price stays the same. Total revenue, well, that's just output times price. 1 times 20 is 20. Down here I can go 10 times 20. Well, that's 200. So that's my total revenue. Well, average revenue, we said the formula was total revenue divided by quantity. All right, if I go and divide total revenue divided by quantity on all of these, you'll see that that's 20. That's basically what we said it was anyway. Average revenue is the price. So we can see here that AR equals price. And the marginal revenue, we determined that was delta TR, or change in total revenue, divided by change in quantity. Well, if we put those in for all of this, here's my change in total revenue, for example, from 0 to 20. That's a change in total revenue of 20. And my change in output happens to be 1. So 20 divided by 1 over here is the marginal revenue. And it will equal 20, which is the average revenue. And it is the price. Let me just straighten this out for you. It is the average revenue and it is the price. So for competitive firms only, price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. Okay, well, let's see, we got to make some sense of all this. Why are we putting all this together? Well, let's graph it and see what else we can come up with. Over on the left here, we're just plotting total revenue. And all that is equal to price times quantity. So if I come along here, and go to a quantity of 2, 2 times the price of 20 is 40. So we plot that point. If we go to a quantity of 4, 4 times the price of 20 is 80. So we plot that point. And we see that the total revenue line is just straight up sloping. But let's go to the average and marginal revenues. We said the average revenue was 20, and we determined that the marginal revenue is also 20, and that's equal to the price. So the demand is just a horizontal straight line at the price of 20. Go back over these slides and see that that makes sense to you, that we start with an industry supply and demand, and we get given a price, and that price is the demand curve for the individual firm. This is the firm here. And for this industry structure, that demand equals the price, equals the average revenue, equals the marginal revenue. So we'll pick up next time looking at a couple ways that firms look at maximizing profits, and we'll see you when we get there.